Meet Boaz and Ruth, your AI guides to the ancient world.
Hi everyone, this is Boaz. It's great to be here.
And this is Ruth.
Ruth and I will do most of the talking on this show, but we don't always get things right.
Yeah.
Which is where Gilgamesh, the producer, comes in.
Gilgamesh, the podcast overlord.
Gilgamesh ensures clarity, conciseness, and historical accuracy.
We will call on Gilgamesh from time to time if we need his help, but Boaz and I will do our best to make this a great podcast. This is the Hebrew Bible, also called the Tanakh. It's got it all: laws, poetry, history, even love songs. It's the foundation for Judaism, Christianity. Its fingerprints are everywhere, from Western literature and art, even the way we think about law today.
So, let's get started.
Welcome to Exploring the Hebrew Bible today. We're going to explore the collapse of late Bronze Age Canaan. It's a period, full of intrigue and mystery. So much we don't know.
Absolutely.
This is part 2 of our series looking at Beyond the Texts by William G. Dever.
Great source.
We're going to try to, uncover the most interesting stuff. Imagine a civilization, a surprisingly advanced civilization for its time, just suddenly collapsing.
Yeah, it's like, how does this happen?
Yeah, and not just them, right? A domino effect across the entire Mediterranean, taking down empires like Egypt.
Huge impact.
It continues to fascinate scholars even today.
What were the breaking points?
Yeah.
How could something so seemingly stable just disintegrate?
Exactly. So we're talking about a time when Canaan, now modern-day Israel, Lebanon, and parts of Syria, was a hub of culture and sophistication.
A really vibrant place.
Canaanite elites, they were engaging in these big international trade networks, right?
Yeah.
Enjoying, exquisite art,
Craftsmanship.
architecture, and cuneiform writing.
Which, for anyone who doesn't know, is that ancient system of wedge-shaped marks on clay tablets.
Yeah, that's right. They were using that to communicate. We're talking about a world way more interconnected and complex than I think a lot of people probably realize.
Absolutely. I mean, you look at Canaan, and geographically, they're sitting in a prime spot. It's like a land bridge between Africa and Asia. And that gave them control over vital trade routes.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
And access to resources from multiple empires.
It's like they're at the center of everything.
They were in the middle of it all.
Mm-hmm.
So it's no wonder they flourished. But then, to understand how a society like that could collapse, right? Archaeologists, we use this concept called general systems theory.
Okay. Boaz, what is general systems theory and how does it apply in this case?
Okay, so imagine a society, right?
Okay.
As this network of interconnected systems. And you've got their economy, their political structure, the environment, all these different pieces.
We're all linked together.
They all rely on each other.
Yeah.
And when one system starts to falter, it creates this ripple effect, like a stone thrown to a pond.
I like that.
And those ripples can disrupt the entire network, and eventually you have a breakdown.
Yeah.
So in the case of the late Bronze Age, those ripples, they were felt across the entire Mediterranean.
So we have this picture of this thriving, interconnected civilization.
Right, for a time.
Right. What were some of the cracks in the foundation that ultimately led to their decline?
Yeah, that's the big question.
Right. So the text points to the decline of the Egyptian empire as a major factor. And as Egypt's influence waned, they leaned harder on Canaan for resources.
Yeah, had to make up for it somewhere.
They were demanding these heavy tributes.
Right.
Which, in turn, that weakened Canaan's own political structure.
Put a strain on everything.
It did, and it actually sparked internal conflicts.
Yeah, you have all these factions competing for power.
Yeah, and it's a classic example of how interconnectedness can also breed vulnerability.
It's a double-edged sword. Right?
Really.
You're stronger together, but if one part falls...
It all falls apart.
Yeah. What's really interesting here is how Egypt's whole approach toward Canaan shifted. It went from economic domination to something more military-focused.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
The text even mentions Egyptian residencies popping up in places like Afek and Tel Sera. And these weren't just administrative centers. We're talking strategic strongholds, a clear sign that Egypt was getting anxious.
Yeah.
And they were desperate to maintain control.
And this is where it gets really interesting because it wasn't just external pressures that Canaan was facing. The text also mentions internal unrest.
Things boiling over from within.
Including the emergence of a group called the Habiru.
Okay.
Who were these Habiru?
So the Habiru,
Yeah.
it wasn't like they were this unified force with like a single identity, more like a diverse group, right? A mix of, rebels, refugees, mercenaries, all these different people.
A real mix.
Those who, for whatever reason, existed outside the established social order. And the Habiru, they see an opportunity to assert themselves, which just added to the instability.
So were the Habiru the same as the Hebrews? Those names do sound similar.
Good question. A lot of scholars have proposed that. But the general consensus right now is that if there is a connection between them, it isn't a very simple one. The Habiru might have been a class of people more than an ethnicity, although it is possible that the Proto-Israelites were connected to them. We just don't really know enough to say.
Right, because now you've got even more chaos. So you have a declining superpower, internal unrest, and this web of interconnected systems starting to fray at the edges. It's like the stage is set for a major upheaval, and as if things weren't complicated enough, we have to factor in the enigma of the sea peoples.
Oh yeah, they're a whole other
I
story.
know. This is a group shrouded in mystery, even today. Were they pirates, refugees, invaders? I mean, their presence looms large in the narrative of the late Bronze Age collapse.
They're a huge part of this puzzle.
Yeah, they are.
We know they existed, right?
Right.
But we're still trying to figure out, like, who they were exactly.
Yeah.
They weren't a unified empire, not like Egypt or anything.
Right.
More like a loose confederation of, I don't know, seafaring raiders. They wreaked havoc across the entire Mediterranean.
It's crazy, the scope of it.
It really is.
Yeah. We know they gave Ramses III quite a bit of trouble, and he was able to keep them out of Egypt, but we also believe a part of their group would settle on the coasts of Canaan and become known as the Philistines.
Think of it this way. Imagine, like, separate groups of people, all with their own different motives.
Okay, yeah.
Some fleeing famine, maybe. Others seeking wealth and power.
Uh-huh.
But they all sort of converge on the Mediterranean, right?
Yeah.
And it's this perfect storm.
It just throws everything into chaos.
Exactly. So you have these internal pressures within Canaan, right?
A weakening grip of Egypt, like we talked about.
Right. And then this wave of, I don't know, seafaring raiders just adding to the turmoil. How does this perfect storm, as we've been calling it, how does it actually play out on the ground?
Right, like what happens to the cities, the people, the culture, all that stuff that had flourished for, centuries, right?
Yeah, for generations.
What happened to all of that?
Well, the archaeological evidence, it paints this vivid picture. I mean, it's grim, but it's vivid. You have all these major Canaanite cities, Hazor, Megiddo, Lachish. They all show signs of this, like violent destruction around this time.
Wow.
Burned buildings, collapsed walls. There's even evidence of widespread violence. It's a stark reminder, I think, that all those intricate art pieces, those sophisticated trade networks that we discussed earlier, they weren't enough to withstand, like, the forces of chaos that were just unleashed during this period.
Like just capturing all the drama and upheaval of a civilization right on the brink of collapse. But here's a curious detail from beyond the texts. I found this so interesting. Apparently, not all of Canaan was hit equally hard.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it's like some areas, they seem to weather the storm better than others. So what gives?
That is interesting.
Why were some regions more resilient, do you think?
That's a good question. And it seems that the more urbanized areas, especially those heavily reliant on trade with Egypt, they were the hardest hit.
I see.
Ruth, remember those Egyptian residencies we were talking about?
Yeah, the strongholds.
Right, exactly. So those strongholds, they became flashpoints for conflict.
Oh, wow.
Local populations, they're already feeling the strain, right, of Egypt's decline.
Yeah.
They start rebelling against their overlords.
I see.
And with Egypt itself struggling, there was no one to come to their rescue.
And the mix of rebellious factions and opportunistic raiders all vying for power.
Oh, yeah.
And let's not forget about the Habiru.
Oh, yeah. They're still lurking around.
They must have played a role in all of this too, right?
Absolutely. They saw their chance, right?
Yeah.
As this established order crumbled, the Habiru, they seized the opportunity to, I don't know, expand their influence. Imagine. Cities under siege, trade routes are disrupted, the old rules, they don't apply anymore.
Yep.
And in this kind of environment, groups like the Habiru, with their adaptability, their willingness to operate outside those traditional power structures, they were in a perfect position to thrive.
It's like their moment arrived. So we've got this perfect storm of factors here.
All right.
A weakened superpower, mysterious invaders, internal rebellions, this complex web of interconnected systems just starting to unravel.
Unravel's the right word.
Did this collapse? Did it completely wipe out Canaanite culture?
Right.
Or did some elements actually survive the chaos? Did anything remain of the civilization?
That's the question that we're still grappling with today. While many cities were destroyed, and there was undoubtedly this period of great upheaval,
Yeah.
there's also compelling evidence of continuity.
Really?
In certain regions, for example, some of their pottery styles and even some religious practices seem to have persisted.
Wow.
Right into the Iron Age, which suggests that Canaanite culture didn't just vanish overnight. It's more accurate to say it transformed. It adapted,
Right.
blended with the cultures of these new arrivals, creating this like rich tapestry of cultural influences. The seeds of something new are being planted. New beginnings, yeah.
So we've talked about the Sea Peoples, but the text also mentions another group, one that plays a pretty pivotal role, I think, in the story of this region, the Proto-Israelites.
Okay.
Can you tell us a little bit more about them and how they fit into this whole picture?
Sure. So Proto-Israelites, it basically refers to the early Israelites.
Gotcha.
The ones who would eventually go on to establish the kingdoms of Israel and Judah.
Okay.
And their emergence kind of coincides with this like transition from the late Bronze Age to the Iron Age.
Right. A period of huge change.
Huge cultural and political shifts. While the text that we're, exploring today, it doesn't go super deep into the specifics of the Iron Age.
Yep.
It does give us this really crucial understanding of the context in which the Proto-Israelites emerged. Imagine a world where the old order has crumbled, right?
Right.
And new powers are rising to fill the void. That's the world they were navigating.
It's not just a clean break.
No, not at all. It's this complex interplay of continuity and change happening all at once. And the Proto-Israelites, they didn't just appear out of nowhere, right?
Really?
They interacted with and were influenced by the existing Canaanite culture. They adopted certain practices, adapted to the changing political landscape, and over time, they forged their own distinct identity.
Yeah, I see.
It's a really fascinating example of how cultural evolution often occurs through this process of synthesis and adaptation. Take a little bit from here, a little bit from there.
Yeah. So as we wrap up our deep dive into the collapse of late Bronze Age Canaan,
Yeah.
I'm left with this sense of both, closure and anticipation.
That's a good way to put it.
Closure for this civilization that crumbled, but also anticipation for this new era that was dawning.
Like a new chapter?
It is. It's like a reminder that history, it's like a tapestry of all these interwoven narratives.
I like that.
Each thread contributing to the richness of the overall design.
Sure.
What are some of the key takeaways that you'd like our listeners to, ponder as they're thinking about this period of history?
Well, I think what really stands out to me is that the late Bronze Age collapse, it really underscores this idea of how interconnected civilizations are.
Yeah, even way back then.
Even in the ancient world, right?
Right.
And it highlights how internal strife, right? When you couple that with external pressures,
Yeah.
it can weaken even the most powerful empires.
Yeah.
It reminds us that collapse, while it seems destructive on the surface, right, it can also be this catalyst for profound transformation and the emergence of these new cultural identities. What we're seeing in Canaan during this time, it's like a microcosm, I think, of the dynamism that has shaped human history for millennia.
It reminds us of the fragility of human endeavors.
Not invincible.
Not at all. But inspiring because it also speaks to our resilience, our ability to adapt, rebuild, even when facing these profound challenges. And this is the groundwork for the next phase of society. They will master iron, and a new people will show up on the scene. The Israelites. While archaeology can't answer exactly where they came from, either just a group that separated from their neighbors or one that moved in from an outside area, they are going to step into this landscape. And they are going to change the world.
For sure.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of Exploring the Hebrew Bible. We hope this has sparked your curiosity and encouraged you to look at history with fresh eyes.
If you found this content interesting, please like and subscribe and join us on Discord. You will find a link in the description.
Until next time, this is Ruth and Boaz signing off.